so great to be here with all of you today. It's really wonderful to look out and see so many familiar faces and people that have supported this work. So I really value this chance to be here. It's really an honor to be here and to be recognized as a distinguished professor. As the Ross and Mariana Beach Distinguished Professor of Special Education, I follow in the path of others, including Ann and Rudd Turnbull, who are in the audience, and Mike Waymeyer, who have had the privilege of having this title in the past and have carved out pathways for inclusive, community-engaged, strengths-based, and person and family-centered research at KU. I want to recognize many others in the audience. I could actually spend my entire talk celebrating and elevating the accomplishments, contributions, and provide incredibly well-deserved recognition and accolades for the entire team at the Kansas University Center on Developmental Disabilities, the center that I direct within the Lifespan Institute, as well as all the friends, self-advocates, community members, school partners, and colleagues in the Department of Special Education, the School of Education and Human Sciences, and other units at KU and at other universities that have supported the body of work I'll be talking about today. You in the audience and the many others across the state, country, and world are why I am standing here today. The picture behind this slide is actually our last KU-CDD annual meeting, where almost 60 people participated in person, virtually, or in some capacity, celebrating our successes and planning our future. And one of my proudest accomplishments during my time at KU is how we have grown KU-CDD into a thriving center on the KU campus that advances research, community services, training, information dissemination, and partnerships with the disability community. Our impact is large and growing, and it's because of all of you and because of the importance of the research we are doing. So while I may be getting the recognition today, really everything I am presenting is a team effort. And my biggest regret is not being able to have all of you on the stage with me sharing all the things that you're doing. I also feel that it's really important to acknowledge that everything I do builds on words, terms, and ideas that the disability community itself has identified, elevated, and challenged me and our research community to focus on. I only hope that through my past and ongoing work, I can elevate that knowledge and help challenge systems in our society that struggle to hear and accept what is enshrined in our guiding disability laws and policies, like the Individuals with Disabilities Act, the Developmental Disabilities Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act. All say that disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. And I hope the research that we are doing to advance self-determination and systems of support furthers this recognition and right. So today is not really about me, even though I am here talking. Today is about we, and it is a celebration of the work that has been done, but more importantly, the work that needs to continue to be done to advance equity and inclusion for people with disabilities. So I will be using the collective we throughout my talk today to actively recognize, acknowledge, and honor the fact that all of my work is rooted in what the disability community has fought for, advocated for, and deserves as members of our society. But I do want, and probably need, to provide some context and background for what has led me here, and why I try to use rigorous research methods to demonstrate how we can advance self-determination outcomes. I have had the privilege of working in the disability field for my entire career. One of my first jobs was working as a direct support professional, and some of my earliest internship experiences were working in a sheltered workshop and an institution for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Places where I learned from the people that were imprisoned there that we needed different and better solutions. These experiences and the things that I learned to do as a professional have pushed me to recognize the need to change how we do research and how we build inclusive systems of support that advance self-determination. My work is shaped by what people with intellectual and developmental disabilities told me in those settings, oftentimes through behaviors that others described as challenging, but that I learned to see as communication and advocacy for the right to make decisions and to live, learn, work, and play in an inclusive society. My drive to support people with disabilities to have agency in their lives and to change systems that deny this also comes from my somewhat coincidental personal experiences. My disability experience and identity emerged in my late teens and early 20s. Not all of you, but some of you know that for most of my 20s, I used an electric scooter and canes. And while medical advances have changed many things for me, I still deal with significant and ongoing impacts on my mobility and my health. But what I learned during this time was how your experiences in society changed when people saw you as an other. Strangers asking what was wrong with me, the random advice to eat more broccoli, it's always the vegetables. The broken elevators, the inaccessible bathrooms, the professors who thought reasonable accommodations were unfair, the hours on the phone with insurance companies. This was what made my life most difficult. But I didn't really understand how to advocate, especially in systems where others were positioned as the expert, and when I was not viewed or treated as a person that had agency over my life. These combined experiences have led to my work to advance self-determination and causal agency in partnership with the disability community and others that are marginalized by our existing societal structures. I hope that my work serves the dual purpose of changing and challenging systems and also advancing research-based strategies that can be used in schools, communities, and disability systems to recognize that each person is the expert in their own life, and each professional's role is to facilitate this expertise. The work that I'll be talking about today is driven by the theoretical framework that we have developed, causal agency theory. It's rooted in the belief that all people, including people with disabilities and those with other identities that are marginalized in our current societal structures, have the right to set the goals, drive the agenda, and make choices, good and bad, about their lives. And they can and they will when they're not limited by systems. But we know from research and the collective wisdom in the disability community that all too often this right is taken away for people with disabilities. And the chance to be here today to continue to change this and further elevate these possibilities is why this is such an honor. So after this relatively longish introduction, I want to share more about what we have learned about self-determination in the work that we've done over the past 20 plus years. And I want to start with the voices of the people that work every day to advance self-determination, created by our communications specialist, Austin Myers, who's in the back, at KUCDD. I also want to apologize in advance. They're having some technology problems in the room, so the sound might be a little quiet. So listen carefully, and there are captions.
It's important because people need to follow their own goals. They need to be excited about what they are learning and what they are doing in life, because if you're not excited and passionate about something, then you will not succeed in it.
Self-determination to me means independence and identity and kind of yourself, that sort of way.
Like a self-manifested motivation to accomplish a variety of like personal goals or incentives.
What is self-determination? I'm going to take a minute and have you think about it.
And when they set their own goals, it becomes personal, and then they have more initiative to achieve that personal goal. It's theirs. It's not me telling them what to do.
Okay, great. How about over here? Somebody in this group here. Yeah.
It's like telling yourself to do something and it's your own will making you do it, not someone else telling you.
I like that. Yeah.
So they take a vested interest in what they're doing because they set that personal goal.
And over here.
Knowing what you want to do and then setting out to do it, like having the motivation to do it.
So motivation is part of it. And we know that you have your own motivations, and I can motivate you, but I'm trying to help you learn how to motivate yourself by setting goals as well.
Self-determination is about making yourself feel good, making yourself to be able to be heard on issues that are important to you. And that is why it is important to have That is why it's important for people to give us options to choose, options to make our own choices and decisions.
You have the motivation to do what you want, and it's like you have the ability to find a job or, all that stuff. That's what it means to me.
Self-determination means being in charge of your own life. It means you still receive supports, you still use other people's aid to get what you need, but you're the one who sets goals and you basically live by your own goals.
We're at the end of the road and of student, with student school careers, and you say, what have we done? Tell us what your plan was to remove that barrier of people telling you what to do or trying to help.
Yeah.
That was a barrier.
Okay.
What did you do? Tell Patrick.
No, thanks. I got this.
You know what that means?
Yeah, no thanks. I got this. That means no thank you. I got this. I can help.
Was it a polite way to take away the barrier?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did people know what he meant?
Yeah.
Do you think? Yeah. So that worked. And is that something you can do in your future?
Yeah.
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 How did you feel when they just backed off?
Mm.
How did you feel?
Happy.
Good. So that was an action that you took.
Yep.
To be able to do something. You removed the barrier.
I know there's a lot of definitions that people throw around about what self-determination is, but mine is doing what you want to do and being able to ask the right people if you need help with certain things.
It's really important that people have mentors in their lives and support people who believe in themselves, and to think that the impossible is possible and you can make your dreams come true.
To learn more about self-determination, please visit selfdetermination.ku.edu.
So the voices in this video show us what self-determination is all about. Acting or causing things to happen in your life and having the supports that motivate and enable you to do so. It gave us a glimpse of how schools, as well as other systems, can advance this outcome using practices that we have developed and researched at KU and that are now used locally and across the country and world to support schools and communities to advance self-determination. So that's the what of self-determination, but let me also address the why. Put most simply, we know that self-determination impacts outcomes. Adults with disabilities experience significant, pervasive, and deeply troubling disparities in accessing competitive integrated employment, post-secondary education, health and wellness supports. For example, young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are a third as likely as their peers without disabilities to have jobs in adulthood. They're significantly less likely to access post-secondary education and significantly more likely to have health disparities. These disparities are further exacerbated for people of color with disabilities. But some of our most cited research shows that when we promote self-determination using research-based strategies that focus on respecting, celebrating, and elevating students with disabilities, identities, and goals, young people with disabilities go on to have better in-school outcomes, including greater access to the general education curriculum, academic and transition goal attainment, motivation, as well as ongoing more positive outcomes as they move into adulthood, greater access to competitive integrated employment, post-secondary education, community participation. We still need systems to change, but we know that self-determination makes a difference. As I mentioned previously, to make systemic change and give people with disabilities access to self-determination opportunities, one focus of our work has been building a theory that highlights how we change expectations about the possibilities for students with disabilities and how schools educate kids, how society recognizes people with disabilities as part of inclusive communities, and how we share information and conceptualize research. This theory that I mentioned earlier, called causal agency theory, defines and integrates key self-determined actions and ways to support these actions rooted in the education and psychology literature. and highlights the role of the environment in facilitating or creating barriers to self-determination outcomes. We focus on psychological needs, motivation, volitional and agentic action, and action control beliefs, and how these together lead to enhanced self-determination when context provides supports and opportunities. While the theory and our terms and visualizations of it are rooted in the literature and guide my work, we have also recognized that it's essential to make this theory accessible to all people that can actualize it through plain language communication. A growing movement in the disability and broader community to make sure that what is researched is accessible to the community it's purported to benefit and to challenge academic jargon. So we've built an accessible version of this theory in partnership with the disability community that we can use to guide practice. This visual, which probably looks more appealing to almost everyone in the audience, highlights how we communicate about causal agency theory and support people with disabilities and those that support them to understand what self-determination is and what it means in their lives. It highlights how deciding, acting, and believing are essential to self-determination and having opportunities and being supported in going after one's goals. And we've worked with people with disabilities to identify key skills that are associated with deciding, acting, and believing that are listed on this screen. We've taken this work on causal agency theory and plain language descriptions of causal agency theory and what it means in people with disabilities' lives, and developed an assessment system to create more opportunities to talk about and understand self-determination and how it is expressed that can guide systems to focus on this as an outcome. Through several federal grants and other generous supports, we've developed the self-determination inventory. This provides a systematic way to ask people with disabilities questions about their self-determination. It's now widely used as a common outcome measure in research, especially in trials evaluating interventions in education and disability. It's also used in practice in schools and disability support systems. The SDI, as we call it, is a short assessment that gets at how people with disabilities and their peers without disabilities, as we develop this to be an inclusive assessment that anyone can use, feel about their self-determination. We have a version for young people, age 13 to 22, the student report, a version for adults over 18, the adult report. We also have a version for parents and teachers to provide their input. And we're working on a version for younger children. We've built the system to be online, accessible, and to meet the highest standards for reliability and validity in assessment development. We've also sought to make it available. Any of you can go online, even right now on your smartphones, and take the assessment now or support others to take it. We've also built a data dashboard system that allows for longitudinal data to be collected so we can analyze outcomes over time. Since the introduction of this dashboard system about 5 years ago, we now have data on over 60,000 people in the system, allowing us to track and look at multiple factors that impact self-determination, including documenting disparities. For example, using this data, we have found that people from racially and ethnically marginalized groups who also experience disability, that is, they experience intersectionality, have significant disparities in their self-determination. That is, they score lower by a large amount, represented as an effect size on this slide. It's a relatively heavy number slide, I'll admit. The highlighted box shows that for youth with intellectual disability that are Black and Hispanic, they report significantly lower self-determination than their white peers without disabilities. We have argued this is not because of inherent differences, it's because of a lack of supports within systems for self-determination. Research like this allows us to document inequities and shape ongoing research and practice. To try to change these disparate outcomes and give more people access to these tools, we have built this system to not only give us data for research like what I've described here, but to be online and to provide immediate, meaningful feedback to the user. After anyone completes the self-determination inventory for a research study, in practice, or for any purpose, they receive an immediate report on strengths and areas of need related to self-determination, a profile of decide, act, and believe. This also gives them details on research-based instructional strategies that can be put into action based on their scores. This can be used by students, families, teachers, schools, disability support organizations, and others to provide actionable information. In addition to the report, We also have guides that provide in-depth information on research-based strategies presented in an accessible way that users can download and apply in their context. So a young person that scored lower in Believe can immediately access resources rooted in research that they can apply in their lives. As I mentioned, we now have multiple school districts and state departments of education across the country that are using this assessment as part of their transition planning to enable teachers, students, and IEP teams to have a valid and meaningful measure of self-determination and action steps based on assessment scores. This is in addition to the research teams that use the data collected to determine the most effective practices and track outcomes. And we are using all of this data to better understand self-determination going forward and empower more people to have these conversations and evaluate these outcomes. As one user with a disability said recently, I'm excited to introduce others to a cool new tool called the SDI. And the SDI is not just making a difference in the United States. We have translation projects across the globe showing how important this idea of supporting self-determination is internationally, and the utility of this construct when conceptualized in culturally sustaining ways. Our website currently has an American Sign Language and Spanish version of the SDI, and we're working on translation and validation projects in all the countries highlighted on this map. We meet with these teams regularly to build an international group focused on advancing self-determination and cross-cultural validity in assessment. Building assessment systems and common measurement tools is an important step in advancing awareness and understanding of self-determination and creating access to information to address disparities in self-determination outcomes. And we are proud of this work. But we also know we have to focus on how to go beyond just talking about self-determination and figure out how to change systems and practices, how to provide new tools that create the context for advancing self-determination. Part of this work is putting people with disabilities at the center of driving their lives and setting goals for themselves and the systems that support them. As one school leader that uses the SDLMI calls it, supporting students to become the CEO of their own life and learning. To do this, through generous support from federal grants and other sources, we have developed, tested, refined, and disseminated an intervention linked to causal agency theory, the self-determined learning model of instruction. The SDLMI, as we call it, takes a relatively simple concept that we all set goals, that we all go through the steps to build action plans, that we all adjust our goals and our plans and start the process again as we learn, revise, and identify new goals. The SDLMI provides a way for teachers, disability professionals, families, and community members to enable people with disabilities to have agency over this goal-setting process with the supports they want and value. The steps in the goal-setting and attainment process are often not made concrete for any of us. How many of you could tell me all the steps that you take and all the supports that you need and leverage to go after your goals, big and small? I'm not seeing a lot of people jumping up and saying, yes, yes, yes. All of us, including people with disabilities, often do not have access to the resources and supports to learn all these skills. People with disabilities, too, often because of systemic barriers, have even fewer opportunities. We know from research that people often do things for people with disabilities, or they set goals and tell people with disabilities what those goals are. But this does not let people with disabilities, or any of us, try, experiment, learn, fail, grow, and gain motivation and self-regulatory abilities. But these are the skills, abilities, and beliefs that lead to the positive outcomes I mentioned earlier in this talk. So we've sought to take this relatively simple idea that self-determination and goal setting and planning for one's future is important and build an intervention that can be implemented by teachers, whole schools, disability organizations, families, people that support employment, restructuring how we support goal setting, and in doing so shift to person-directed models, not system-directed models. The SDLMI has research-based core components that are always delivered when it is being used, but we've sought to keep it flexible so that it can be used in any setting where people are thinking about goals. And using implementation science, we have developed, rigorously tested in schools across the country and world, the best ways to embed this into the curriculum and classroom instruction for students with and without disabilities, as well as into employment, post-secondary education, and other community supports for people with disabilities. This screen shows an array of implementation tools, ranging from a semester-long set of implementation materials and activities for use in school, to a coaching model that can be used by trained coaches to support teachers in integrating this into their curriculum, to an app that can use technology to deliver this instruction, to materials that can be used with adults with disabilities of any age in the community to set goals for jobs, community activities, and even planning for retirement. We have a systematic professional development workshop for teachers and disability support professionals, and are creating other online and training resources to advance adoption and use. We're even beginning to train people with disabilities to deliver the SDLMI to provide peer-to-peer support and mentoring. And we're continuously collecting data and using rigorous research methods to learn what is most effective in scaling up these practices, to challenge systems to support people with disabilities to guide their own learning goals in school and beyond, as well as to ask more fundamental questions about the relationship between goal-directed, self-regulatory behaviors and outcomes. Throughout all of this research, we have documented the impacts of the SDLMI are profound. To date, more than 40 empirical studies by our research team and other research groups have documented the impact of the SDLMI across the life course for people with a range of disability-related support needs. We have demonstrated positive outcomes on academic, social, employment, and community living goals and outcomes. The SDLMI is recognized by national organizations as an evidence-based approach, particularly during transition planning, as students are moving from school to their adult lives. We have established it can be a way to bring together students with and without disabilities in inclusive settings to set goals, and to prepare teachers to think about their own professional development and goal setting for their instruction, and to change how disability systems approach goal setting for employment and community participation. I don't have time to talk about all these studies in depth, and even if I did, I would probably bore all of you with that. But I do want to assure all the researchers and data nerds in the audience that we're using rigorous methods to explore not only the impacts of the SDLMI, but to also better understand the person, the family, the school, and the system factors that create, supports, and barriers to growth and change and self-determination. I do, however, want to briefly summarize some key findings from over the years, and I'll show you some associated, and I'll admit complicated, graphs from some of our different publications. First, self-determination develops and changes over time. Young people follow different trajectories and need different supports. It takes time and individualized supports to develop self-determination abilities and beliefs. But it happens for people with disabilities, including those with the most complex support needs. And the SDLMI can provide this instruction as well as be combined with other approaches to provide more intensive instruction when needed. But how young people perceive themselves and how society perceives them matters in self-determination outcomes. If students identify as disabled, versus as others label them with a disability, we see different patterns of self-determination growth in response to the SDLMI. The same is true if students are aware of their IEP, their individualized education program, and the supports that they're receiving in school. This shows us that all too often students are not aware of their supports that they have access to and empowered to enable and connect with others with disability and a disability identity. This influences their supports and outcomes while they're in school and likely carries forward as they move post-school. Relatedly, we see different responses to the SDLMI and different perceptions of self-determination and goal attainment by teachers and others in students' life based on students' characteristics, including not only disability, but also students' race and ethnicity, and likely other identities that students bring into the classroom. Students who are multiply marginalized because of their disability and because of their race and ethnicity in our current systems have different outcomes during self-determination instruction. This means that we need to think about how to conceptualize interventions and supports from the start using culturally responsive practices and challenge systemic biases that are limiting expectations and creating misalignments in our science and in our practice to advance equity and inclusion in self-determination research and practice. Not unsurprisingly then, we've also learned that teachers and systems need supports if we expect them to do this and make these changes. It takes time, coaching, and other supports to deeply change practice and implement these interventions at high quality and with high student engagement. Teachers, for example, can use materials that we give them. This is what the very first panel shows. They can easily use these practices, but it takes coaching, time, and other supports to do this with high quality and in ways that students are engaging. All of this research highlights the complexity of working in schools and communities and of supporting people with disabilities and their families. But there is a unifying theme. Self-determination can be promoted through instruction and supportive systems, and it leads to better outcomes. The SDLMI provides an evidence-based way to do this, but for this to be realized for all students, we need to be inclusive and culturally responsive in self-determination research and practice. Key to enabling this is making sure we have ways to empower communities to use research findings. The same way that we focused on plain language communication of the theory, we have done the same thing with our research findings. We have to, as researchers, think about how to effectively disseminate these findings to support change and empower communities to have the information to make change. For example, the graphs I just showed you, not exactly the most clear in communicating these ideas, right? I'm seeing at least some nods. I mean, maybe some people understood them. I'd be very impressed. But I want to show you, these are some amazing infographics that our communication team at KUCDD has created to share back with schools, teachers, students, and families the outcomes of some of these 40+ studies. We use these in planning meetings with school teams to support reflecting on what has happened and planning for ongoing changes in practices in schools. We've shared them with students and families to highlight their roles in research and in making change. So sharing what we learn in multiple ways is essential. This is what makes research actionable for schools, teachers, families, students, and communities. I hope a key theme that everyone has heard throughout my talk today, and that cuts across the hundreds of papers, presentations, and grants that Barb mentioned at the beginning of the talk, is that a key part of having an impact through science is listening to and partnering with people with disabilities. As I am closing, I want to make explicit this theme and share how it is continuing to push the field and our work forward. One of my first research partners, who participated as a student in one of my earliest federally funded intervention projects, and whose stories and his family's stories about his self-determination journey were shared in my first book for teachers on how to promote self-determination and transition planning, said something a number of years ago, going on 20 years now, that has always stuck with me. Working on self-determination has opened my eyes that I could do it, but I think I've opened a lot of eyes too. Think of the power and truth in what Jake said. Jake grew from using the SDLMI, confirming what all those numbers and complicated graphs said. But he also saw that he was changing others and how important this change was. Jake was able to communicate something so important that it's not just about what he's learning, but it's about making change in how others see him and how others support him. This has pushed me to continue to think about new directions, not just in self-determination research, but in inclusive research and practice more generally. How can and do people with disabilities open eyes, including our eyes in research? And what is their rightful role in the research, training, and dissemination I've talked about today? Part of this, I believe, is furthering inclusive research, which we define at KUCDD as research that centers people with disabilities in all phases of the research project: planning a project, conducting the project, disseminating the findings, advancing self-determination, and actionable outcomes valued by the disability community. Inclusive research is receiving significant attention in the disability field, and there are multiple efforts underway in universities, in funding systems, and in other venues to advance its broader application. This is because research is beginning to show that having teams with people with and without lived experience with disability leads to more impactful research that is better aligned with the values and needs of the disability community. I see many people nodding in the audience because we've known this, but making this a reality is the ongoing challenge. So in my work and in our work at KUCDD, we've been focused on building inclusive research teams and engaging co-researchers with intellectual and developmental disabilities for the past 5 years. This is why I believe we have been able to have such impacts and engagement with the community through our work. And we are seeking to push ourselves forward. The Zoom image on the screen is a shot from the first meeting of a new learning series for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that we are just starting with new grants. The learning series focuses on identifying and engaging people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in learning about how to plan, conduct, and disseminate a research project. It's providing access to information that has not been accessible in the past. We've designed this to be accessible and meaningful and to create opportunities to practice these research skills. We also have a parallel network of researchers that are interested in building inclusive research teams that's meeting to identify opportunities to create career pathways for the people that are participating in this learning series. We're very early in this process. It's an 8-month learning series that we're just starting to implement. But we're very excited about how this may be able to push us forward and learn more about how to provide training, career pathways, and opportunities for inclusive research practices. And to drive home what a difference this can make and how important this is, I want you to hear from some of the co-researchers at KUCDD that we've been able to hire over the past 5 years and join our team in a video that they created about why this matters.
What is one piece of advice you would give for those working to increase their inclusivity in research?
One of the things that I would do and that we're continuing to work on is being inclusive in research is being able to find people's strengths and what they might be good at to do the research. And I also want to say that being able to accommodate a person's needs when it comes to doing research.
The one piece of advice I would give those who want to increase their inclusive research is actively seek out self-advocates to be a part of your team. There are probably many self-advocates who would be interested in research. They have just never been asked.
Don't knock so easily research that is led by people with disabilities. Genuinely give that sort of research a chance. Because it can often mean that it turns out better than research led by non-disabled people. And to make sure that this research is providing people with disabilities a service, and they're not just providing services to this research. Make sure this is the kind of research they want done. Make sure beyond anything else that this is something that will meet the preoccupations of people with disabilities and not just non-disabled people.
Powerful, right? I believe that it is this partnership and collaboration that has the potential to make ongoing change in the systems that support people with disabilities. As I close, I want to come back to the we and the role of the disability community in advancing self-determination. The quote on the screen is from 1989, when Bob Williams, a disabled leader and then commissioner of the Administration on Developmental Disabilities, the part of the federal government that funded then and continues to fund centers like our Kansas University Center on Developmental Disabilities, said, "We, people with disabilities, don't have to be told what self-determination means. We know it is just another word for a life filled with rising expectations, dignity, respect, and opportunities." So I'll emphasize that self-determination is not new to the disability community, but it has been and continues to be a long path to make it a reality. This history behooves all of us to ask what we can do to continue to advance rising expectations, dignity, respect, and opportunities in schools, universities, businesses, and the community. I hope the work that is being recognized with this distinguished professorship and our work at KUCD has played and will continue to play a role in advancing self-determination using inclusive research to raise expectations, dignity, respect, and opportunities through research-based assessment, intervention, and systems change. I'll close with a thank you to everyone here, to everyone that has supported and contributed to this work, and to everyone that will continue to push this work forward in the future, including all of the people on this screen that are seeking to advance KUCD. If you want any more information on any of these areas, you can visit any of our information dissemination resources or reach out to me or anyone else on the team. Many of the people you saw in some of the videos are in the audience today. We're always looking for new ideas and partners. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your support of this work and of me. You know, a lot of the work that we're talking about here is supported through federal research grants, and through those grants, we're trying to find ways to partner with schools to bring these interventions in, to research and develop them. And then when we have these practices, schools can take those and use those inside of their budgets, their professional development, and their resources to be doing that. And so, you know, there's definitely more need to make sure that schools have the supports that they need to be able to take some of these research-based practices and implement them with the supports that are important. And a lot of my work has primarily focused in kind of that high school transition to adulthood period. However, as I tried to mention, we actually have great people at the center and people that are doing work that take this and also are doing it with adults with disabilities, planning for jobs, trying to make change in disability systems. But you bring up something, it tends to get more fragmented after that transition to adulthood, getting systems to communicate, having the resources, and having the people to be doing these. It is definitely an ongoing challenge. So it is how you make that systemic change to bring those systems together. So yeah, it's not easy, and there's a lot of work to be done. Well, I would actually say that I hope 10 years from now that I have worked myself out of the job where I'm coming up with the big new ideas. And I'm not actually just saying that facetiously. I truly hope that we're moving towards a system where people with disabilities in the community are driving those ideas, and we are figuring out, and what I'm doing is figuring out how to create those structures that really provide access to training opportunities, that change the way that we're driving research agendas, and address some of these funding issues, allocating funding towards these types of priorities and showing that this can lead to rigorous research that impacts outcomes. So I hope I'm not the one driving the field at that point, but that I'm there supporting, showing the impact this has and why it's so important. Like even the trajectory of my work originally started with a much more traditional model where we were developing things and then just hoping that schools would use them because we said they were good, and you know the research said they were good, but that's not the way it really works. There's systems. It's the same thing Larry asked about, you know, and Diana. I mean, it really is these pieces of how do we make this something that schools can pick up, that they see the value. And I hope that in many ways, this ongoing shift to making sure we're partnering with the communities, we're much more engaged. I mentioned a lot of our inclusive research with people with lived experience, but we also have teachers that are deeply engaged in a lot of our new development projects and a lot of our work to make sure we're designing with those systems factors in mind. And I really do think, you know, a next generation in some ways, Neil, is really figuring out how we better use implementation science. So I don't just develop this great effective practice, but that there's a whole system around it that talks about how you have to build administrative support and buy-in, how you have to build the professional development model to change attitudes and ideas, and how you have all of that together. Because everything is still very bifurcated right now. Yeah, I mean, I think families are definitely a part of this support system. I think centering the person, especially in that transition and in adulthood, is really important, but I think it's part of that bringing in all of the people that are going to be part of supports. And so families are going to be a key part of identifying and advocating within those systems. But supporting people with disabilities to identify the ways that they want their families to be involved and the mechanisms that are going to be most effective for them to do that, especially as people are transitioning to adulthood, I think is really important. There are, disability definitions related to access and eligibility. So school-based systems have certain definitions of how you identify someone as having a disability, and it's not just enough to have a disability, you also have to need specialized supports and services. So that's one definition. Adult systems have very different definitions. So a kid that might receive supports while they're in school and be perceived by a school system to have a disability might not be perceived the same way in adulthood. There's also a self-identification to that as well, as I tried to talk about really quickly in one of those studies, that how you perceive yourself if you have a disability identity versus if you don't embrace that identity. So there's not a bright line, and the line changes fundamentally across the systems that people are interacting with, which can create a lot of barriers. And it's so true what you're saying, that often we don't empower people with disabilities and families to make connections to groups that focus on building identity and community. There is a disability community, but not all people are supported to access it. But I think that technology is one of those things that really can play a role. Like, we've been very excited to have this project where we're developing an app-based delivery of the SDLMI that addresses some of the things, teacher time, teacher demands. It takes a lot to do this and to learn to do it and have the time and the systems. So I think there are some ways that we really can use technology, also providing more immediate feedback and guidance and supports as you're going through this learning process. Now, the downside of that is, unfortunately, technology is also often not always designed with the needs of users with disabilities in mind. It's not designed to be not just physically and kind of sensory accessible, but cognitive accessibility. Philip was talking about what are we going to do, to make sure that the ADA, we're still not addressing all of those things. It's the same thing with technology. We've had standards, and it continues to be an ongoing issue, even in basic things to build cognitive accessibility into them, including in KU sites. So I think that there are real opportunities there, but there's also some real potential that if people with disabilities aren't at the table in that design, that we're not going to be considering the needs of everyone in the community to leverage the power. We're reaching out to people like you and people we know that are involved in the self-advocacy movement and that we know have kind of real kind of ideas and things to contribute to the research process, but you're bringing up a bigger issue. We shouldn't just be reaching out to the people that we know, to the communities we know, and to the partners that we have had. And so I think that a big part of this moving forward is how we overcome those barriers to getting in touch with more people with disabilities, to creating more opportunities to learn about the research process. And so one of the things that I'm actually hoping, I don't know that I've even talked to everyone on my team about this, is even thinking about some of these research skills. We talked about the new learning series that we're starting for adults with intellectual disabilities that are interested in research. I think if we could drop some of this down and think about in high school, really, how do you focus on creating access to rigorous training on research so that that can be a career pathway that's being explored earlier? And what does that look like so that we're really building those pathways and that expectation, especially with a growing focus on access to post-secondary education and other opportunities. So I think we have to broaden the net of people we're talking to about these things and really think about how we create more access to those opportunities. We do try in our work to work across kind of more rural schools as well as kind of urban schools, so that we're really trying to look at. That goes to some of the questions about how do you deal with all the different ways that schools are structured. When there's only one transition coordinator for 3 schools, who can support all of the students and what does that look like? But so we are really trying to make sure that we're testing in all of those different settings to better understand how that works. I have always been very interested in adolescence, and that's just where my work has largely sat. But the number of teachers and partners that always tells us the importance of doing this early, we know this. I can tell you, we actually are really excited. We currently have a big project that we're doing that's actually taking the SDLMI that we kind of develop and use in high school and with adults, and modifying it to be used in upper elementary. So with 4th and 5th graders, we're actually working here in Lawrence with some teachers to try to do some of that work. So we're really looking at trying to drop this down, because you're right, we still need to be doing it in secondary school, but if we're laying that foundation early on, it's going to be much more powerful. So we're starting to move in that direction. People are convincing me that you can work with younger kids and it won't be too scary. I will be honest, I haven't always shared kind of my experiences and my journey. Really, I didn't become interested or even know what self-determination was or why it was so important, even though I saw it in the people I worked with. But it was really when people took away my ability to make choices, how that was just so hard, and it just changed my life. And I never have wanted anyone else to experience that. And so I've been so lucky to be able to access education, to rise into roles like this. And so I always just want to try to make sure that I'm doing what I can to make sure other people aren't having those experiences. And I can't tell you, though, exactly how. I just knew that there was something wrong with the way things were, and I didn't want people to keep having those wrongs happen to them.